Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Giannetti of the International Housewares Association and Homepage News. The IHA continues its series of free webinars providing the home and housewares industry with information and insights to help navigate tariffs. In today's third update, business advisor and housewares industry veteran Luke Peters will walk through strategies importers are using right now to reduce tariff exposure and protect margins. Luke brings 20 plus years of hand-on experience with global supply chains, tariffs, and product distribution as the founder of appliance supplier New Air, which he sold to private equity in 2021. Today, as CEO of Apex, he now advises founder-led businesses on how to scale profitably and optimize their value. A few things before we get started. Please note today's session is intended to provide information on options available to the home and housewares industry to address tariff mitigation. It is not legal advice and should not be construed or used as such. We encourage you to contact your freight forwarder, freight service provider, and legal resources to discuss practices that might be available and applicable to your business. The IHA has set up a tariff resource page on its website, www.housewares.org, that aggregates all of its tariff-related education and advocacy initiatives, including links to freight forwarders, tariff tracking and calculating resources, bonded warehouses, domestic contract manufacturer lists, webinar recordings, government affairs programs, IHA sourcing missions, and more. We will leave some time at the end of today's session to answer questions, which can be submitted using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. We understand you might have questions encompassing a wide range of tariff matters, but please try to keep today's questions for this session limited to the topic of tariff mitigation. Today's session will be recorded and made available soon to attendees. With that, I'm pleased to welcome Luke Peters. Luke, the session is yours.
Thanks, Peter. This is exciting, and welcome everybody from IHA. Been going to the show and displaying and running a company in the industry for many years. So let me get my deck up here and get going here. Okay, awesome. Thanks again, everybody, for having me here. IHA is so important. I think I first went back in the early 2000s. Started my company in 2001 and then shortly went after. And then, with New Air, ended up displaying at a booth for many, many years. So it's close to my heart. So today we're going to talk about tariff survival tactics, and we're going to focus just sort of on the categories that I'm going to go through now. Peter gave a nice intro already, so this is kind of the same thing here. I have my contact information. I'll have it at the very end as well. We're going to limit this just to these tariff strategies. There are obviously other strategies, but the focus on this conversation is going to be the following. Okay, so we're going to talk about the first sale rule. We're going to talk about unbundling, delivery duty paid, tariff engineering, binding rulings and classifications and what that means, and country of origin realignment, which basically just means shifting your supply chain to a different country. So those are going to be the specific categories, and we got about an hour to talk about them. We'll try to leave some time for questions at the end, but as Peter noted, some of these, there's legal compliance and some company-specific questions that are probably outside of the scope of this discussion. But we will do our best. Okay, so before we get started, obviously, 301 was the major one that hit the industry, right? And what I wanted to say is where we are now, everybody, many in our industry are at about 55%. I say about because it can vary. There could be some small tariffs on some categories that you might be dealing with, but you're at 55. Because a lot of us are, because you'll have 25 from 301, and then we're at 30, where the latest tariffs have been lowered down to 10 plus 20 plus 25. Now, there are, I'm sure most of you are aware of this, but there were many exclusions that were extended in the 301 category for many years, right? Exclusions would go on and off, and those are now potentially coming to an end. We don't know if they're going to be renewed. Okay, so that's up in the air, and some of those coming to an end very soon. So this is some of the HTS reclassification strategies that we'll go over in this talk. It honestly is unknown what's going to happen with these exclusions and if there will be opportunities in which categories to move to. And that's why your customs broker is always should be your first point of contact. Okay, but I'm going to go through several strategies for you to think about. But I wanted to start with this slide to give you an idea of just a baseline of where we are. And also, before I go on, my experience, I was running a company through this and then, worked our way through it to a potential or to finally to an exit to private equity. So I'm very familiar with the start of the tariffs and then the exclusions and then even with some of the strategies we're going to talk about because we used them. Okay, especially the binding classification. Reclassification. So let's talk about DDP, delivery duty paid. This is maybe the biggest new topic that I've heard. Okay, because I'm working with other CEOs and private equity and just different deals and opportunities that I run through. So this is a big topic, but I'll go through it in detail. So basically, DDP is we're basically the seller exporters responsible for paying all of the duties, clearing the customs, delivering the goods, duty paid to your facility. Okay, if any of you are selling direct to Amazon on a vendor relationship, you might be selling them DDP already, right? The foreign supplier becomes the importer of record. That's typically what this would look like for most of us in the industry here. And now I'll get into some potential problems with DDP, but the benefits are that it's going to offer you a predictable landed cost. You won't have to do your paperwork. They're going to do it for you. It can be very convenient, time saving. In certain cases, suppliers might have better pricing power or rebates, and so you can gain a couple points there. But U.S. Customs can still hold the buyer liable if the duties aren't paid. So what you're going to need to do with DDP, so DDP looked great, and then when people looked into it, they got a little bit, maybe nervous about it because you have to be with a very, very trusted partner. You should require proof of duties paid, entry summaries, commercial invoices. You got to vet your supplier's history. And, a lot of us have 10, 15-year relationships with suppliers. But if you don't, this is one where you really want to vet them, right? Because they're supposed to be paying the duty. And if they don't, you could be on the hook for that. Okay, so, as an example, U.S. importer plastic storage bin supplier has U.S. subsidiary acting as an importer of record. Goods arrive duty paid with all custom entry handled by the seller. And, you avoid internal customs filings and the result is predictable landed costs, simplified operations, and no customs issues. But how do we know when DDP is actually saving us money or just shifting the risk to the supplier? This is the key thing, and this is why DDP has been a big topic, but it's also been one where people are sort of hesitant to jump into it, right? It's like, oh, that looks awesome. Okay, let me get into the details and see if we can do it. And then a lot of people are sort of worried to pull the trigger, except for another example, which I'll bring up, where they're pulling the trigger all day. So DDP can simplify your logistics, offer costs predictability, right? But it's not always cheaper. You got to request a full documentation. You need to compare your DDP quotes to your direct import costs with your broker, and you need to vet the supplier. So it only works when you have trust, documentation, and price transparency. Now, what's everybody afraid to put down on paper? Okay, the main thing is this is where honestly our competition, direct factories, could be, let's say, taking advantage of the system because they could be lowering prices, then creating an intermediary, or just for you, if they all of a sudden say, oh, no problem, we can handle your shipments and we can, you won't have to pay the extra tariffs. You should start maybe questioning it. Like, wait a minute, how are you actually doing that? Right. And how they're doing it is maybe they are paying tariffs, but they're just lowering the invoice price by half on their end. Right. So there could be a lot of games that are played with DDP. And I think that's why initially people were like, oh, yeah, this could be a great opportunity. But then they're like, all right, these are sort of shady. They're not even shady areas. They're just outright dangerous areas to be a part of. And so there's an opportunity where DDP can simplify things, and that's good. And then there's an opportunity where you could be on the hook if there's some shady business going on. So you want to be wary of that. And there's safer alternatives. But this could work for some companies, and I guarantee you there's competition out there using it, and that's how they're beating and winning on price. And that's just an unfortunate fact. Okay, first sale rule, very similar to DDP, but this lets you declare the factory to agent price instead of your final purchase price for duty calculation. So for first sale, especially a lot of smaller companies, and even if you just have convenience where you're using an agent, you can take advantage of first sale. So agent, in this case, what could happen is agent could lower the price, give you a price decrease, and you could get a break on your duties that way. And there's a number of ways this could happen. There's other technical ways. There's some unbundling that could be baked into this, and we'll talk about that slide a little later. And also some tariff engineering. So this can be used in conjunction with other strategies, but it's especially useful for, say, smaller companies, because usually if you're larger, you're going direct with the factory, and you may even have your own teams out there. But if you're just using an agent, then this could be a nice alternative. And at the same funny business, though, can be baked into this, where prices are decreased, and then other compensation is figured out, where they're like, okay, here, we can move some of that payment to IP and some of that payment over to initial investment in molds. Right? I'm sure you guys have heard these different strategies, right, to make up for the price decrease. Okay, but this can be challenged by Customs and Border Control. But again, that's where your attorney is going to come in, and your broker for advice in your specific situation. But that's a first sale rule. And so, these are examples. Say a cookware importer is buying from an agent. Factory sells the pans for $5 to the agent, who resells them at $7. So the first sale rule, declaring the value at $5. So you're going to save, 50 cents on a 25% tariff. Obviously, the tariffs are moving all over, so I just put this 25% example in here. And then I have another example here with a furniture brand. So the key thing is, and we'll talk about this with binding rulings later, is, making sure that you're following the rules and that CBP is not going to have any issues with it. That's a lot better than other conversations I've heard where people will say, well, Customs is going to be so busy, they won't be able to sift through all of this. I mean, you're taking probably an unneeded risk at that point. The unfortunate thing is, some of your competitors, especially the factory direct competitors, are taking those risks, and they're not going to pay a penalty. They're not going to get in trouble. They can just make shell companies, and they can take advantage of these first two examples, okay, DDP and first sale. So it's good to know that, because when you're talking to congressmen and congresswomen and trying to, get the understanding of the industry and what laws and protections should be put in place, like how it took so long for de minimis to be put, the recent tariffs on de minimis, it took years. This is a known loophole. There's a loophole here, unfortunately, right? So the question is, for the first sale rule, how do we ensure that CBP accepts the documentation? Okay, so here's the specific understanding of this. Okay, so acceptance hinges on an arm's length transaction, right? So you have to show that the factory to agent is independent, which is fair, right? Because in most cases it is. If you're a smaller firm, you're working with an agent, it is a separate organization. And then you have the sale is for export, so prove the first sale was intended for U.S. export, and then have audit ready docs. So that's what you need to do. And I think first sale is definitely, like I said, DDP was, at first really exciting, but then not used as much because there's a lot of risk there. And I think first sale has more of an opportunity, especially for smaller firms. Okay, so let's talk about unbundling. Now, unbundling, this is where you import products separately instead of fully assembled units to assign each component a lower HTS code. Now, again, a lot of this is up in the air, right? With 301, we're going to see what's going to happen. Every time we think those exemptions are going to come to an end, they've been renewed, honestly. So that's why I'm keeping the door open on that, even though we don't know. It's an unknown of what's going to happen here if there's going to be new exemptions. But we don't know, so that's an opportunity, and there's always ways to look for different HTS. I mean, even right now with steel aluminum, being at 25 and most of our products at 55, right? So, okay, so why it works. So finished products often get hit with the higher composite duties. Parts may fall under lower duties in some categories, and I'll give you some examples, right? You have motors, housings, accessories. And then customs can reclassify items if it does suspect circumvention. So we're going to talk about how to avoid that. So you want to use staggered shipments and ensure distinct entries, okay? And you want to work with a broker to validate the codes. And unbundling, especially for larger firms that are able to make sense of this, right? Because you got to bring it in, and then you're kind of putting it back together. It's going to take a little bit of labor here. So a couple of examples would be brand switch from finished vacuums to importing the parts, motor plastic body classified separately, assembled in U.S. warehouse. Now, why would they do that? Because they could sell the motors and the plastic parts separately anyways. You see, so you have to have that justification. This is an accurate example, and you have to have that justification with your product. And if your volume is heavy enough, and that you're able to spend the time and have the team, and maybe you're not 3PLing everything, you got your own distribution centers, this is a practical way to do it. So this is another good example with the blender bases. So blender is imported as a base, jar, and lid separately, okay? Jar and lid classified as lower duties, final assembly in the US. And why? Because they can sell the jar, the lid separately, and the base separately. And so as long as they're doing this right, bringing them in under separate shipments, separate entries, they're getting that favorable status. So what are the legal compliance risks of unbundling? Could Customs and Border Protection accuse you of circumventing the tariffs? And the answer is yes, if they deem your shipments are artificially split or reassembled to dodge the duties. Okay, and so it may reclassify them and penalize you. May being the key word here, and that's again where you got to work with your team. But so you want to ensure each part has its own function and legitimate use, and you want to use separate entries and shipments. You want to keep clear engineering and commercial rationale. Unbundling works when there's substance, not structure. Now that's a key term. Okay, you have to have substance, not structure, and that's going to lower your risk of getting in trouble. So, the motor and base can power other small appliances. The jar and lid could be sold separately as replacements. See, so you have to, and there's a lot of products, not just in the appliance side, but, housewares is a huge category. So there's going to be a lot of different opportunities where this could be an option. These parts are sometimes sold individually to repair, resale, or as accessories, and each part has its own HTS classification, commercial purpose, and you can document engineering and customer use cases for each one. So that's the level that you want to work through, and you're gonna even go deeper because you're gonna want to make sure that it's bulletproof. Okay, tariff engineering. Okay, so you want to adjust the design, materials, or import condition to qualify. So it's similar to unbundling, okay? And I'll kind of give you, I think on the next slide, a little bit of an example of how it's different. But it is similar to unbundling. So what you want to do is you want to ship unassembled. You want to use different materials. So here, depending on the product and how it's made and what material, you could shift to a different classification. You could potentially shift into just the steel tariffs or the aluminum tariffs. And before that, there was much lower tariffs, right? So tariff engineering was used extensively. Now, keep in mind, the administration's trying to remove some of these obvious loopholes, right? That's why, with the new way the tariffs are being rolled out, and even on some of the raw materials, that some of this may become a little bit more difficult, but it's still there. And there's still many categories with exclusions. And so that's where tariff engineering can work for some firms. Changes must impact classification under Customs Border Protection guidelines. Compliance must be a real design difference. So there's no cosmetic tweaks to get this done. You want to involve your engineers early on. Okay, so again, we just talked about unbundling. So tariff engineering means that you're intentionally designing or modifying a product. Okay, so you're changing the materials, the configuration, the condition at import to qualify for a lower duty or HTS code. Unbundling is simply splitting an existing product into two shipments without a design change. So it's a little bit riskier and more likely to be challenged. And, frankly, a lot of these are not likely to be challenged, but if they are, it's like anything else. You want to stay on the right side of the road. That's how I run things. So I don't want to put myself out there for that potential risk. And especially if you're not just buying off the shelf, right? If you're not just 100% off the shelf and you're owning some IP and you're doing your own design and you don't own any molds, then tariff engineering would be a huge strategy on any new product development, right? You would want to think ahead. You would say, okay, how can we design this to hit potentially a different code? And a lot of that's sort of moving around right now, depending on what the administration does. But you can see the difference of how tariff engineering and unbundling. Tariff engineering is more thoughtful, so it's a strategic decision. And unbundling is just a logistical workaround. Okay, so these are actually similar examples. So this one is for tariff engineering, though. So let's take a look at how this is different. The components are shipped unassembled, qualified as parts, first finished appliance, final U.S. assembly validated the classification, and then they saved 20% in this older case on a tariff reduction. So how do we actually find lower HTS codes? Do we need to hire a trade attorney, or are there tools or services? Okay, you don't have to hire a lawyer. In my experience, it's great to be connected to an attorney, though. It is, because as you get to that final decision point, and I'll give you an example, I think on the next case or two where it really worked for us, but an attorney can be great, but everything starts with your broker. Okay, so use your customs broker for a classification review. That's your first line. The reason is because you're already paying your customs broker. They're going to do this for you. The lawyers are very expensive. So start with your customs broker, lean on your customs broker, make sure you're pushing your customs broker, and potentially have a couple of them, right? So you can, you probably do already, just for some diversification on rates and shipping. And this is where they can add quite a bit of value. So you can search the rulings for precedents. You can also, for high volume SKUs, consider a binding ruling. Okay, and that's something that we did, and we're successful. And I'll tell you what, when you get a binding ruling, you just feel a lot better. You've got a letter. The government said you're good to go. Yes, these SKUs are approved, and you're out of that gray area. It's a lot better way to operate. We'll talk about a binding ruling next. And it's interesting that some folks do this without getting the binding ruling, but you can get it, and especially previous to the recent tariffs, just with 301s and some of the exclusions, that was definitely the way to go. You can also use software tools. Zonos, Avalara, they can help model landed costs. So start with your broker. They often uncover the savings faster than a legal team. Okay, and also legal teams. Usually brokers will have a lot of firsthand experience, right? And you know how it is talking with the lawyer. Lawyer's first answer to everything is no. Okay, and they're very worried about risk mitigation, and that's good for the final step. But when you're looking for brainstorming options and ideas, customs broker is going to actually know other companies, what they're doing, and that's going to be valuable for you, right? Because they're going to have those examples, and they can sort of be a little more creative and entrepreneurial about their answers with you. Okay, so binding rulings and audits. Okay, so this is one, again, I have firsthand experience with this, and it confirms HTS codes officially. Okay, audits review your current classification. So misclassification could cost millions, right? Especially when your volumes are high, and it can create compliance risk. And some of these new classifications made a lot of sense when the opportunity arose, with 301. So you want to find alternative codes, or correcting errors can reduce duty rates. The rulings provide legal certainty. Okay, that's what was great for me. You've got a letter. You're good to go on all of these. You maybe try it for other new products, and if it doesn't get approved, it's clear. Okay, these ones you're going to have to pay the duty on, or let's say for the exclusion in a lot of cases, these ones you don't get the exclusion. These SKUs you do, and guess what? What did everybody do? They went to new product development, and so now okay, this is the category that I can develop on and not have tariffs, and this is the category that I sort of got to let go on, right? That's how most companies would work that angle, and you could review product specs, you could request rulings, and document all the HTS decisions. So that's your best practice, okay, is to try to get a binding ruling if you do a code reclassification. It's going to save you a lot of headache because you're going to have that certainty, and especially, there's liability for sure if you're CEO and founder and running the business. So home goods importer reclassified, wooden shelves, lowered the duty, Section 301 exemption achieved, binding ruling secured, and they saved. Okay, I'm sure for those listening, this was a common thing that happened, right? Everybody found the exemptions and then tried to source into those categories or move their current products into those categories. And there was a lot of success and then a lot of rejections, but the companies who did that were able to kind of survive that era and not have to, raise prices quite as much. And I think there's still those opportunities right now. And we're going to find out as some of these exemptions, we'll find out if they're renewed or not. Okay, so country of origin shift. So what's happening here? So this is actually, you're just saying we're going to move. So this is a strategic decision. Now, up until a week ago, the tariffs were, I don't even know what the tariffs were, but they were over 145%, right? It was sort of hard to figure out how much they were, what was tacked on to in total. I think it was, 155 or 160, depending if your 301 was on it. So then it got knocked down. So people are making the decision, where it is right now at 55%, is that still enough incentive to move to, Vietnam, Mexico, India, and Thailand? And we all know how easy it is from China. And for those who don't know, China is ready-made. It's buy off the shelf if you choose to. Whereas most countries, if you go into Mexico or the U.S., it's you got to work the entire supply chain and figure everything out. So it's quite a bit more work. So even with the tariffs, it's not so easy to say, oh, it's 50% more expensive. I'll go just right to Taiwan, or I'll go to, Vietnam. Taiwan, is pretty user friendly, but not as easy in other areas. So, most people, we'll talk about transshipping quickly, but a lot of, I think I might have that on a different slide, but that's what people have been doing, and that is being highly scrutinized, right? And transshipping is simply shipping from China to, say, Vietnam, relabeling the product, bringing it to the U.S. and skirting the tariffs. That, I think, is a risky thing to do, and obviously, it's not a legal thing to do. So, when you're doing country of origin shift, you're moving your entire production over. And if you are typically buying off the shelf, that means you're not moving, you're looking for a factory over there, right? You're not having to do any of that. So for most of us, it can be done pretty relatively easly. These are real examples, that I found. And it's interesting because with the Yeti move, at first it looked like some of these thermal insulated products were not being produced outside of China because, there's some technical engineering that's needed to do these properly. But it looks like Yeti was able to do this, and Shark Ninja was able to move their supply chain. And I think sometimes smaller companies, they might think this is impossible to do. And, we don't have enough people, and we've spent all this time building these relationships in China. But I'll tell you what, the The big guys are doing it, right? And this is why the smaller companies can get priced out. The big guys are able to do it, and the Chinese factories can skirt the tariffs with the first two strategies we talked about, DDP and first sale. They can manipulate those to get a price advantage. So where are you left? Playing fair, playing by the rules, and staying without, looking for other cheaper locations or lower tariff locations. So I think companies need to get more serious about this, just in my experience, because over time you're going to have a lot of price friction. So Helen of Troy, same deal. We're able to move. So notice, a lot of it's still in Southeast Asia, but these countries, I believe, are down to 10% tariff, and also outside of 301. Okay, so what's the realistic timeline to build a U.S. or nearshore sourcing model? So funny story, I'll tell you guys. I'm also developing a product, and I'm in the engineering side of it right now. So and after this, I'll be working with the trademark attorney, and it's a small product, but it has electronics. It's going to plug into the wall. It's very small, and so I've got the plastics, and then I've got the chip and the board and another moving part that's inside of it, and a plug. And so all of these things, so I've already looked at, where sourcing this outside of Asia, even sourcing it here in the US. So I'll give you, some timelines here. So simple products, 3 to 6 months for sourcing. Now, keep in mind, a lot of housewares products are not electrics, right? So way easier to move outside of China. If you have electrics, you've got a bit of a supply chain that you have to work with. So custom tools, molds, electrics, 6 to 12 months. I would say expect, costs 10 to 50% or even higher than 50% higher in the US. And it's amazing that the US supply chain is so fragmented. I think that's something that the administration should actually focus on, just to make it easy. Like, China is just so easy. It's so user-friendly. And then the US supply chain, it's like state by state differences on who you're going to get help from and guidance from. But that would be the estimate, about 6 to 12 months. And so, how do we know if we're currently overpaying tariffs or tariffs are misclassified? If there's a simple audit process. So you can start with the tariff classification audit, ask your customs broker to review your top 20 SKUs, pull 12 months of import data and HTS codes, compare to rulings of alternative codes, and then if discrepancies emerge, fix them going forward and file for refunds. And yes, you actually can get refunds. Okay, I don't know if any of you experienced that early on. If you got a tariff exemption, you actually will get a refund. Okay, so that's like a beautiful check to receive. And a lot of folks discover big savings. Even way bigger than even 5 to 10%. So that's something to consider. So we're going to have some time for questions here. I went through the deck pretty quick. But one thing I wanted to say is, in this conversation, we're sticking with these key strategies that we talked about. There's many other strategies, but those are outside of the scope of this discussion. They might have to do with, P&L decisions and potential supply chain issues that might come up because no one's ordered a container and now everybody's going to have to order containers. So there's a lot of moving pieces, but for today, we're focused on these actual tariff mitigation strategies that we talked about here. And Peter, we got some time for questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Luke. And we'll leave this panel up while we go through some of the questions, so you can, if you want to reach out to Luke. Luke, thanks. We have a few questions, but before I get to that, there's a chat going on, and there is some questions regarding how the stacking of tariffs works. Luke kind of addressed that earlier on. Rather than get into answering those questions now, this is probably not the best forum for that. A couple things you can do is contact your broker, or at the IHA Tariff Resources page on housewares.org. You'll see it along the top of the homepage there. There are some resources in there that might be helpful. There's a couple resources that provide sort of a flow chart of how the tariffs are working and how it stacks on top of one another. And there's also a partnership that IHA has with a company called Quick Code, which is a trade compliance organization that has set up a program for IHA members. And one of the things Quick Code can do is go in by HTS code and sort of do the math for you, so you know exactly what your what the rates that are going to apply for you. It's very complicated. Things move. Sometimes there's a little uncertainty about how the stainless steel and aluminum tariffs sort of factor in. So I would recommend like getting in touch with some of those resources. Go to the page, learn a little bit about Quick Code, or as I said, contact your customs broker. What we'll try to do is focus on some of the questions we had that were related to this. And I'm just going to go through them. And Luke, you can kind of look at the questions if you want as we're going to. And maybe there's one. Hold on. All right. And to someone asking, there is going to be a recording of this session, and the earlier sessions are also available. Links to that on the tariff resource, IHA tariff resource page, and we'll make a recording of this session available very soon for all of today's attendees. So someone asked a question regarding first sale. What is qualified as offshore intermediaries or trading companies? If we are buying from a trading company in the country that the goods are produced, would the trading company qualify in this case?
You see, again, my understanding is yes to that answer, but the trading company bought from the factory. And so right now you're probably buying direct from the trading company, paying the tariff. You know, you're buying say $100 from the trading company, and they're not revealing what they're buying from the factory. Maybe it's 85 or 90. And so that's where you could pick up some savings, right? But a lot of them, the thing is, a lot of them would be reluctant to share that information, Peter. And I think what's happening now is, so that's with an existing relationship, right? And so you would get, say it's $15, you would now not pay tariffs on those $15. Again, you got to run all this through your broker and legal, but that's legitimately exactly how the first sale is meant to be used. But now what's happening is trading companies are literally just opening up, or these middle companies are opening up just to sort of take advantage of first sale.
There's a couple questions here related to DDP. The first one is, what if DDP is offered by the forwarder in China without involvement of the supplier? And the second part is, how much auditing is done by CBP in the whole process?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I've been on calls where people are like, I just do it. CDP's, Customs and Border Patrol is going to be too busy. I personally don't like that strategy. I'd want to follow the law. And the first example you brought up is super common right now. That's exactly how these opportunities are coming up, is that China is facilitating that sort of middle relationship to make it happen. But again, you got to be careful, especially if it's a new relationship. If follow sort of the logistics that I laid out, and work with your broker, because if you don't have proof that those tariffs are being paid and you don't have all that paperwork, you could be liable for it.
I have a question for you regarding, as far as you understand, the unbundling. It may not apply to many companies or many products, if you will, in our industry, but maybe I'm wrong. Is it more available to people than they might think if they have a simpler product with less components in it, or no components at all?
I think look, we have a really diverse industry, so it's definitely available, but I think there's two issues. Number one, it depends on what happens with 301, because there's a lot of opportunities within 301, right? Because there's a lot of exclusions. So it'll be dependent on the exclusions going forward. And then there's also work to be done here at home, right? With unbundling. So a lot of folks who don't have the full supply chain, who don't have the full logistics and warehousing and people to handle it, for them, a lot of people priced it out and it wasn't worth it. They're saving a few percent here, and then they got to repackage and do some work here at home. And so that made it not worthwhile. The larger companies definitely could be worthwhile.
Good. We have a few more questions on first sale. Let's try to get to those. If one implements first sale, do you recommend sending a custom notification letter?
A customs letter. You know what? That's sort of a legal question. So I think you got to go with the customs broker. But yeah, I think I defer to them.
That's fair. Again, this may be something that we want to defer, and I think it will be, but I'll ask it anyway. How is the total invoice indicated in first sale on an invoice? First sale cost, $20, but cost of goods is actually $25. How is the $5 stated on the import document?
You know what? That's one that would take more time offline to show an
Okay.
example, because I don't want to talk about it, but you know, in the wrong way, right? Without showing an example, so everybody who's listening understands it. But basically, you know, with first sale, you're showing that the intermediary is already buying at a cheaper price. And I understand what they're asking. They're asking for how to document that properly, but it's pretty hard to do that on a webinar.
Got it. I got it. Got it. And folks, I know you're asking some very specific questions about various materials and where the stainless steel and aluminum tariff will apply. And again, we're not going to be able to address those specifically today, but I do encourage you to get in touch with your customs broker, get a free demo of Quick Code by going through the program at the IHA website, and just stay tuned to some of the tracking platforms that are out there. And again, we link to those at the IHA site.
And Peter, what I've seen, just to chime in really quick on that, is when these tariffs first came out, a lot of people thought they could get lower rates by just classifying their product as the commodity. And I've seen those personally not work out. I'm sure there's examples where they are, but you know, when there's engineering, okay, your product's made out of stainless steel, but it's an engineered product to do something. You're not coming in just at the steel price is what I've seen.
Trying to get to other questions related to what we discussed today. And again, folks, I know that there's a lot of specific questions on the tariff rates and the various levels that you're applicable to. You know, I think Luke tried to explain that the Section 301s that were put in place during Trump 1, upheld during the Biden administration, those still existed before any of the imposition of tariffs that took place during Trump 2. So you have to, if your products fall within that Section 301 tariff, you need to understand that. But again, get clarification of what exactly your products are caught up in with regard to the tariffs from some of the brokerage services that you use right now.
Yeah, and we have two problems there. You know, the thing is, first of all, people literally don't know, and I'm not exaggerating, they literally don't know when a container, and this is say a week ago and before, they literally didn't know what they were going to be tariffed at. If a container arrived, you know, with the higher tariffs, they literally would just be like, all right, let's see what it comes in at. They didn't even know how to calculate it. There wasn't an obvious way in some cases. And I mean, they had an idea, but you know, it wasn't 100% sure. So that is a problem. Like there's this uncertainty. And then the other problem is just nobody's ordered product, or not nobody, but a lot of companies have literally stopped all orders. So there is a lot of uncertainty on where things are going to fall.
Interesting. Well, here's an interesting one. Is there a self-policing or self-reporting mechanism in place to advise prospective people who are violating the legal pathways that you are suggesting today?
I haven't seen it. I'm sure there's ways to write to, you know, Customs and Border Protection, and yeah, it can be irritating. So sometimes people have their reasons why they don't want to do that, but right now I think that cheating is rampant on, you know, it really is, especially if companies don't have a lot of risk here in the U.S., right? They're just selling into the U.S., but they're not, they're not a lot of personal risk because they're, you know, foreign entities. There's a ton of cheating. It's very hard to compete.
Yep, I got you. This one's interesting. Again, I don't know if you feel that you can dig into it. I see that the cost of engineering, molds, commissions, and freight can be removed from the quote unquote landed cost for valuation purposes. Can we remove the cost of production machinery from the total product cost? Do you know that?
A lot of people think you can, and again, this gets down to the legal side of things. But this is where, you know, some of those are one-time expenses, so it's hard to think about how you're going to remove them. But this is a pretty active area where I'll say that a lot of companies are actually employing this. It's an active area because at minimum, you can do, you know, some engineering, some design work, up front. And then, there's a lot of other areas that can go into it. And I don't think it amounts to a lot. It could be 10, 15%, but that can make a difference.
Got it. This is a question that we've gotten asked on many of our webinars, and we've tried to answer it. It's not necessarily related specifically to today's topic, but I'll throw it out there just so you can help clarify this. They invoked the fact that there's a 90-day pause on the with China tariffs right now down to 30%. Is the date the container sets sail leaving China, or is it the date it clears the U.S. in terms of what the value is set at and when it's paid?
In my experience, all the dates have been when it clears.
Okay, because it's not set at the value of it is not set on shipment.
It's been in the past. It's been when it clears. I mean,
Okay.
if you had a exclusion and the exclusion ended on a certain date, you had to have it cleared by that date.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. But you're right. This is a good question because recently, we had the liberation tariffs that went way up on China, right? And then a lot of people assumed they were active on that day. And then I heard that it was only about a week or two ago, containers arriving would be active. But then other people I talked to, they had paid tariffs previously. So there's just a lot of uncertainty.
Yes, and again, I think we have learned that the uncertainty is one of the biggest challenges. And to the extent that you consider and take a look at some of the strategies that Luke has outlined today, I think we're dealing with an escalated tariff scenario right now. So it's hot right now. It's heated, and we all have this real urgency to sort of get all those answers. But it seems to me, Luke, that these are strategies, these are tools that should just be in everyone's toolbox, whether it's for today, tomorrow, down the road. It's just good to have a sense of what kind of practices are available to mitigate these costs right now.
Yeah, because, well, Peter, the thing is, the smart companies are already moving on it. They've already moved their supply chain. They're bigger, so they're able to do it, and they've already diversified and at least moved part of their supply chain. And then they've also, on new product development, they've already made adjustments. Okay, these categories are, I can engineer these categories, or they'll have a lower tariff, and they'll move products or codes. So that's all part of the new product development and all part of the sourcing strategy for the larger companies. And so the main thing is, like, if smaller companies need to react and react quick, otherwise, they're going to get outpriced.
Yeah,
I think 6 of the top 10 Amazon sellers are Chinese direct, right? This is what we've seen the last couple of years. So it's just there's a lot of pressure for smaller companies to move quick and maintain your margins.
I got you. When we were preparing for this, we stressed that the methods that Luke was outlining were going to be lawful methods. These are legal practices that are at work right now. And I think Luke made an interesting point. There are other things out there. These are the things that are sort of tried and true. They've been put in place. They are demonstrating value right now as we speak, right, Luke?
Exactly. Companies are using these right now.
Yep. Questions on some of the tariff rates, go to the tariff resource page, IHA. I'm going to cut out of this. Luke, you can stop sharing your screen right now.
Yep.
And I just want to thank Luke Peters. He's been around the housewares industry for a long time, and he is out there talking to companies right now and providing kind of thought leadership in terms of how to deal with some of these problems. And he's actually helping people in our industry. So thank you, Luke, for spending some time today to walk us through tariff mitigation strategies. We are capturing all your questions out there. We have sort of made a commitment at IHA that if we weren't able to get to an answer today, but we are able to get it in another form, whether it's through an IHA blog, whether it's through another webinar as things develop, we're trying to answer all the questions we're capable of answering. And if we can't, to direct you to those people that will be able to help you. A reminder that this session was recorded, and it's going to be made available soon to attendees of today's webinar. We're committed at IHA to keeping the home and housewares suppliers, retailers, and affiliates updated on tariff and trade developments through this webinar series, through the tariff resource page, through blogs on the IHA website, housewares.org, to editorial reports and homepage news and other channels. Just an update on something. IHA members can also find information on how to participate in IHA sourcing missions. We have one coming up to Vietnam in June, and another one is planned for India in October. And if you go to that tariff resource page at housewares.org, there is a section there dedicated to trade missions. Click on that, and that'll give you some information and connect you to our team to help see if you can join us on those missions. That is all the time we have for today. Thanks again, Luke. And for the IHA and Homepage News, I'm Peter Gianetti, and we'll see you real soon. Thanks, everyone.